What is going on, everybody? Been a diehard Pistons fan since '03 and eager to see this team getting back to playing winning basketball. The Detroit Pistons' first game of the year just wrapped up as the Pistons fall to the Indiana Pacers by a score of 115 to 109. In this video, we are going to highlight some of the individual performances that I thought were impressive, talk about what led to the loss, talk about the positive takeaways from this game because there definitely are some. But overall, was just a pretty wild game, so definitely want to try and cover everything in this video. So the first individual performance that we do need to highlight is going to be Cade. Cade finished the game with 28 points, 5 boards, and 8 assists. He was 10 of 23 from the field and had 3 turnovers on the night. So to start off the game, Cade was pretty quiet in the first half. He finished the first half with just 6 points. But even during that point in time where he wasn't really able to find his shot, Nembhard was giving him really good defense on the other end, he was able to impact the game in positive ways because he was getting assists. He was able to find Ivy on a nice dish. He was able to find Duren for a beautiful lob. So in that first half, even though he wasn't really scoring, he did find good ways to impact the game as far as a playmaker goes. But once we came out at halftime, Cade just absolutely took over. He went off for 18 points in the third quarter alone. By the end of the kind of little run he was on, they were sending double teams his way, which was getting opportunities for other players. And then at the end of that quarter, he did hit a step back three that took us into the fourth quarter with a lot of positive momentum. There's definitely some things to touch up on for Cade going forward, but overall, especially after the first half, considering how he was able to find his shot in the second, all things considered, I felt like Cade had a very good game. So the second person that I did want to highlight here tonight is going to be Jalen Duren. Jalen Duren finished the game with 13 points, 13 boards, 4 assists. He was 4 of 4 from the field while shooting 5 of 6 from the free throw line. Overall, I felt like it was a pretty alright, decent game for Jalen Duren. There was a lot of talk throughout the offseason about his defense and how he needs to get better on that end. And I think there was some really good flashes of that tonight. He did not have an easy matchup whatsoever in Miles Turner, who's a borderline all-star type of caliber big in this league. And I felt like he was able to deal with him on that end more or less in a pretty positive way. There was one play in particular in the first half where their defensive rotations as a team were looking really crisp, and then Jalen Duren did end up kind of maneuvering Turner out of bounds and forcing him baseline, which led him there. And it was just a really positive play for me to see, especially considering all the chatter about his defense throughout the summer. I think that Duren had just a really big impact on this game. On the glass, he made a huge difference. Some of the dunks that he had definitely gave this team some energy. Felt like overall for Jalen Duren, it was a pretty all right night. And the third person I want to highlight here is going to be Jaden Ivey. Now, of course, we talked all through the preseason about how many improvements it felt like J.I. was making. He finished the night tonight with 17 points, 5 boards, and 4 assists, shooting 5 of 13 from the field, 7 of 9 from the free throw line. I think that Jaden Ivey did a really good job tonight, just for the most part, fitting in and playing within himself, not having all of those kind of wonky plays where he would leave his feet that we saw in earlier years and cause turnovers. He only had 1 turnover on the night. He had a couple nice, really crafty layups. He was getting to the rim. He was getting to the free throw line. It was kind of starting to feel like this is the Jaden Ivey that we all had planned on seeing when we drafted him. Him using his speed to his advantage to be able to get into the paint and draw contact with crafty layups and just everything in between. I felt like Jaden Ivey played a pretty good game tonight, but I think that there's going to be even better games for J.I. very quickly. And now the last kind of one person slash group of people that I do want to highlight is the vets before we kind of talk about some of the more team-oriented stuff. Because I felt like the presence of the veterans were felt big time. Tobias had 13 points. Malik Beasley had 14 points. Tim Hardaway Jr. had 14 points. They definitely made a difference shooting the ball. Tim Hardaway Jr. knocked down 4 of those. When the game just first opened up, there was a lot of jitters on both ends, and Tim Hardaway was kind of able to get us rolling by knocking down the first 2 threes of the game. And it just makes a huge difference having these guys on the floor. You can just feel their veteran presence. You can tell that these guys have been around the block in the NBA. You could really just kind of feel it, for lack of better terms. Of course, the spacing that these guys provide also was able to really pop off your screen if you had watched the Pistons last year. But pretty much everything that I expected coming out of the veteran additions for myself personally tonight. So, to kind of talk about some more team-oriented stuff, it's kind of hard for me to even pick where to start. I guess the first thing I'll talk about before we kind of get into the more technical side of things is going to be the rotations. So we had talked a lot on this channel, and Pistons fans have talked a lot in general about the rotations for the season. The Pistons played the rotation exactly how we kind of anticipated. But there was one small exception, and that was that Marcus Sasser did get 3 minutes of burn as the backup point guard in the second quarter. I think that was probably just because Jaden Ivey did pick up a couple fouls early. So rather than staggering Cade and Ivy like Bickerstaff did in the second half, in the first half, he opted to have Sasser go out there and play for a couple minutes. In his few minutes, I felt like Marcus Sasser did a pretty good job. He knocked down a long two that I thought was a three originally, had a rebound, had an assist. Definitely didn't cause any issues on the floor, and he was actually +9 in the 3 minutes he was out there. Way too small of a sample size to take anything away from that, but I say that just to say that the minutes that Sasser spent on the floor were the opposite of something that felt wrong or like he was incapable of being out there. So that's pretty much what I would expect going forward for now for the rotation. Of course, when Asar gets back, that might change some things. Paul Reed potentially snag some minutes somewhere down the line. But for the most part, I think that those 9 guys that actually played substantial minutes tonight, the starters plus Fontecchio, Holland, Stewart, and Beasley, is probably the rotation that we can expect going forward for the time being. So the first thing that kind of really jumped off the screen for me in the first half especially, and throughout a lot of the game, was just the defensive energy and discipline feels so much better than last year. I know that that's a pretty low bar to beat, but the rotations were more crisp. The Pistons were keeping the Pacers out of the paint, forcing them to shoot a lot of threes, which the Pacers wanted to do anyways, but they weren't really falling at a great clip in the first half, so it looked good, and it wasn't like they were giving up a bunch of threes that were wide open, even though that did happen quite a bit down the stretch when it was closeout time. I think that overall, the energy on that end was just better than what we've seen. We saw Stewart diving for loose balls. Beasley dove for a loose ball. Was seeing vets kind of clapping their hands, getting into it. Ron Holland was talking smack. The bench was more into it as well. The energy just felt different. And I definitely am not the only person who noticed that. I follow a lot of other people who are fans of other teams or within the basketball scene in other capacities on Twitter. A lot of people are watching this game tonight, and other people noticed that as well. So I think the energy thing is definitely a good thing, but I don't want to read too far into it because the energy was really good for the home opener last year, and we all know how that played out. But the defensive execution, as far as the rotations go, switching off the ball, all of that type of stuff, it did feel pretty crisp, and that's honestly all I could really ask for. I think Holland made a big impact in his minutes at that kind of side of the ball as well on the defensive end. There was a few plays where he was denying off ball, causing a lot of havoc. He finished with a couple steals as well. So the defensive end looked pretty good. The offensive stuff, I felt like it just came and went. And the worst part about it is it went at the worst time. When it was closeout time, the game was like 101 to 100. That's when the offense got kind of stagnant. It got a little bit rough right down the stretch, and it was like we were kind of clawing and fighting for every basket we could get after we crossed that 100-point mark with 4 or 5 minutes left. And I wasn't crazy about how the end of the game went from the offensive side of the ball, but I think that is something that will improve over time. The end of game execution is probably one of the hardest parts of NBA basketball, and I think that there's definitely some strides to be made as far as that kind of late game, finding a way to get a bucket type of thing goes. Right down the stretch there, Cade was able to put a spin move on Siakam and score. Outside of that, there was a couple plays that I wasn't that crazy about, where Stewart had a look at a corner three, thought about it again, and then shot it and missed it. Wasn't a huge fan of that, but realistically, as far as just zooming out, broad view, first game of the year, It's hard for me to be really upset about this. Of course, I'd feel way better about it if it was a win, but I felt like there was a lot of really positive takeaways from this game, and it's only game one. If things get better from here, great. And I think that there's a lot of foundational pieces that looked good as far as the young guys go, and the vets looked good. So I'm definitely excited for game two. I think this team looked as good as I possibly could have hoped in a loss. I know it's tough to lose the first game of the year, especially with the tough schedule we have coming up, but it could have been a lot worse. And as I mentioned, this is about all you can ask for in a loss, a competitive one where it came down to the end of the game and the shots just weren't dropping when they really needed to drop. So let me know what you guys think. We will be back here for another game on Friday. We'll probably have a pregame out for that tomorrow, and we'll go from there. First game, it's a loss, but a competitive one nevertheless. Catch up with y'all soon.